somewhere between a factory floor in Chicago and a customs checkpoint in Guangdong. A US-made electric motor came to a sudden halt. The problem, a single missing part smaller than a breath mint that brought the entire production to a standstill. That tiny but critical piece is a rare earth magnet, which China controls almost entirely, and now China has decided to stop exporting it. Here's where things take an unexpected turn. Instead of searching for a fast workaround, Ford made a drastic decision. They shut down the entire production line. And now behind closed doors, American manufacturers are starting to quietly discuss an idea they weren't supposed to even consider. What if we move the whole operation to China after 5 long years of trade war, billions of dollars in tariffs, and intense political debates about decoupling the end game? May turn out to be American companies turning back to Beijing for access and permission. The strategy that was meant to separate the two economies is now starting to feel more like a carefully set trap, and China is tightening its grip. The trade numbers tell a very clear story. In April alone, China's exports to the United States dropped by 21%, but the situation is even more severe when you look at the flow of goods in the opposite direction. U.S. ocean container exports to China plunged 77% from March to April, falling to just 57,300 TEUs. According to shipping data from Panga reported via CNBC. This dramatic drop happened right after Trump announced his latest round of reciprocal tariffs in April. But this isn't just about fewer shipments anymore, it's triggering a massive reshaping of global supply chains. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, major U.S. automakers alarmed by the growing risk of rare earth shortages are now seriously considering moving motor production directly into China. This would allow them to avoid Beijing's strict controls over rare earth magnet exports entirely. What was originally designed to bring manufacturing back to the United States is now having the opposite effect, pushing it deeper into China's economic sphere. And the next move in this high-stakes standoff might be even more surprising, and complex China's strategy to redirect trade is already delivering major results. From January through April 2025, Beijing's trade surplus with Europe reached an all-time high of $90 billion. Analysts, as reported by Shipco News, predict that this figure could climb beyond $250 billion by the end of the year if current trends continue. At the same time, the United States is facing a dramatic collapse in its own trade activity. In April alone, total American ocean exports dropped by a staggering 78%. This sharp decline shows how deeply these trade tensions are now affecting the entire flow of global commerce. Chinese exporters, seeing the shrinking demand from U.S. buyers, are shifting their focus toward Europe, where demand remains strong. They are also benefiting from a significant drop in the value of the yuan, which recently fell to its lowest level in 13 years against the euro. This currency shift makes Chinese products even more affordable and competitive in European markets. French and German importers, already dealing with supply chain problems caused by the tariffs, are increasing their purchases from China. As a result, American shipping routes are becoming quieter and quieter, while Chinese exports continue to flow steadily into Europe. But the real battle now goes beyond just where the goods are being shipped. It's also about who ends up paying for these rising costs. With U.S. consumers becoming frustrated over higher prices, large American retail companies are pushing back. According to the South China Morning Post, these retailers are now demanding that Chinese suppliers cover as much as 66% of Trump's new tariffs. The pressure is building on every side, and what was once a trade dispute is quickly evolving into a global power struggle over control, influence, and economic survival. With profit margins already razor-thin and price floors pushed to their breaking point, Chinese manufacturers are refusing to surrender. Rather than giving in, they're shifting strategies, adjusting prices, rerouting their supply chains, and standing their ground against mounting pressure. In response to the tariffs, exporters based in Beijing, have started aggressively slashing prices by 5 to 10%, while simultaneously redirecting shipments toward regions like Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. These areas not only offer lower tariffs, but are also experiencing increasing demand for Chinese goods, making them attractive alternatives to the heavily tariffed US market. There have been claims circulating that China might step in to subsidize American importers directly, but so far these remain speculative and unsupported. No credible independent data confirm such a move. When analyzed carefully, the argument doesn't hold up. If Chinese exporters absorb the extra tariff costs themselves, many face the very real threat of financial collapse and bankruptcy. If American retailers take on the additional expenses, they would be forced to raise prices, which could lead to consumer backlash. And if consumers end up paying the higher prices, many might reduce their spending altogether, causing demand to plummet. In every scenario, somebody takes a hit, which makes the entire system increasingly unstable. But here's where the situation takes a surprising turn, and it's one few. This economic contradiction is now actively shaping global manufacturing decisions, directly influencing where new factories are being built. And surprisingly, those factories aren't setting up shop in the United States. When former President Trump introduced these tariffs, the main goal was to penalize Chinese exporters and bring manufacturing jobs back to American soil. However, the reality on the ground is telling a very different story. According to recent data from Pangaea US, exports in April dropped dramatically to just 57,300 TEUs. A sharp decline from 265,500 TEUs recorded in March, marking a staggering 78% decrease. This massive drop is directly linked to China's retaliatory tariffs on American goods, which have skyrocketed into the triple digits, especially targeting crucial high V-value industrial inputs that American manufacturers heavily depend on. Looking at US steel trade figures, it becomes even clearer how deeply intertwined the American manufacturing sector is with global supply chains. Roughly 26% of the steel used in the US and 44% of its aluminum is imported. With tariffs doubling on these essential raw materials, the cost of producing goods domestically has surged dramatically. This makes many American-made products too expensive to compete internationally, further eroding the competitive advantage that reshoring was supposed to provide. While politicians continue to promote the narrative of reshoring and economic independence, the real data tells a sobering story. Factory orders are drying up, and many manufacturing operations are either slowing or shutting down altogether. But the challenges don't stop there. The situation becomes even more complicated when we examine the supply chains for electric vehicles and defense technologies. The fate of the remaining production lines now largely hinges on whether automakers can still acquire the materials they need to keep building. Beijing has tightened its control over rare earth magnets, critical components required for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and advanced defense systems. This leaves American automakers facing a stark choice: either find alternative sources for these materials, which is extremely difficult and costly, or shut down their production entirely. Currently, China controls more than 90% of the world's supply of rare earth magnets. On top of that, they have introduced new export licensing rules, which are being deliberately delayed or denied, making it nearly impossible for foreign companies to access these critical materials directly. According to a Wall Street Journal report, several United States automakers are now seriously considering relocating portions of their production operations to China itself, where assembling these magnets into electric motors remains permissible under current Chinese regulations. The consequences of these shortages are already being felt. For example, Ford was forced to halt production at its Chicago Explorer plant back in May due to a lack of available magnets. A supply chain manager interviewed by the Wall Street Journal summed up the situation bluntly: If you want to export a magnet, they won't allow it, but if it's inside a motor, they will. This clear loophole gives China yet another advantage, allowing them to maintain dominance over the global supply chain while keeping foreign companies dependent on Chinese manufacturing capabilities. The real consequences tell a very different story. If this is what victory looks like, then why does it seem like everyone is running from the battlefield? Trump's tariffs were supposed to put China in a tough spot, cornering them economically. But if we look at the numbers, a completely different picture emerges. In just a single month, American exports to China collapsed by a staggering 77%. That's not a small dip, that's nearly wiping out trade overnight. And instead of bringing factories and jobs back to the United States, many American companies are now seriously considering something that would have been unthinkable a few years ago: building brand new plants inside China itself. Why? Just to keep their production lines moving and avoid being cut off from critical Chinese supplies. The Wall Street Journal revealed that Ford had to temporarily shut down its Chicago Explorer plant back in May because they ran out of rare earth magnets, materials that are essential for modern car manufacturing. These rare earth magnets, which mostly come from China, are now restricted by Beijing's export controls unless they're shipped as part of a fully assembled product. As a result, several major American automakers are now weighing whether to shift entire parts of their motor production to China. By doing this, they could legally access the rare earth materials they desperately need. It's a move that's both surprising and worrying. If this is what winning looks like, with factories packing up and moving closer to the supplier, what happens when China decides to cut off the next key component? China isn't just holding on under United States pressure, it's actively adapting and reshaping its economy. According to Apollo Research, United States companies are earning over $1 trillion every year from Chinese consumers' revenue that's now at serious risk. Beijing is pushing harder to support local brands, and it's starting to work. Data from Chinese stock exchanges shows a massive shift. Today, 85 to 90% of revenue for publicly listed companies comes from domestic buyers. American companies' share has dropped into the single digits, and this shift isn't slowing down. In the first 4 months of 2025, China ran a massive $370 billion budget deficit, a 50% jump compared to the previous year. This extra spending is being used to fuel stimulus packages aimed at boosting domestic consumption even more. At the same time, Chinese companies are gaining ground fast. Luckin Coffee is grabbing more and more market share from Starbucks, while Xiaomi is cutting deeply into Apple's iPhone sales. United States companies face a serious risk of losing one of their most important growth markets. Not because of government sanctions, but simply because Chinese consumers are choosing local alternatives. And here's the most important part: Beijing hasn't even issued a full official order to make this happen yet. The shift is happening organically. And there's one more twist that honestly few in Washington saw coming. While you can't import Chinese rare earth magnets directly anymore, you can still import motors that contain those magnets as long as they're assembled in China. It's a legal loophole that, well, completely changes the game and gives Chinese manufacturers even more leverage. The Wall Street Journal recently revealed that this exemption is now pushing many US automakers to seriously consider moving their production lines directly to China. The reason: to gain easier access to restricted components by assembling them into finished products, which cleverly bypasses the current export bans. As one supply chain executive told the Journal quite directly, if you want to export a magnet, they won't allow it. But if that magnet is part of a motor, they will. This has led automakers to carefully crunch the numbers. On one hand, relocating an entire factory may cost millions of dollars, but on the other hand, production line that comes to a halt could cost billions in lost revenue. The ban that was originally designed to isolate the West is somewhat unexpectedly pulling it even deeper into China's orbit. Just last week, China took things a step further by launching a nationwide tracking system. This new system forces rare earth producers to report not only their clients' names, but also the full trading volumes. According to Reuters, this advanced surveillance infrastructure now allows Beijing to monitor exactly where it's most critical. Exports are going in real time and gives it the immediate power to shut down shipments whenever it chooses. This aggressive move builds on the export licensing rule introduced back in April, pushing China's control well beyond traditional tariffs. Now, it's not just about imposing duties. It's about having a complete map of the enemy's supply routes at every stage. When Washington imposed limits on China's access to advanced AI chips, Beijing quickly countered by tightening U.S. access to key rare earth materials like terbium, dysprosium, and scandium elements that are absolutely essential for producing electric vehicles, fighter jets, and a wide range of cutting-edge technologies. What started off as simple tit-for-tat trade restrictions has now morphed into a high-stakes industrial leverage war where both sides are targeting each other's most vulnerable pressure points. But in this struggle, one side controls the minerals, while the other side remains deeply dependent on them. The narrative many believed that American factories would come home, that China would back down, that tariffs would restore balance to trade is quickly falling apart under the hard facts and new data. U.S. manufacturers are not returning home as promised. Instead, they are negotiating new factory leases inside China. Meanwhile, Chinese consumers are increasingly abandoning Western brands in favor of domestic alternatives, rather than bringing production back to American soil. The export war has triggered a major shift in global supply chains, but not the kind that Washington expected. The next phase of this battle won't be decided at shipping docks or in political press conferences. Instead, it'll be fought deep inside electric vehicle motors, semiconductor fabs, and massive battery plants. So now the big question remains: can the U.S. economy adapt and respond quickly enough to survive being locked out from the very components it once so heavily outsourced? Or have we already fallen too far behind to rebuild the manufacturing system that was once handed away? Drop your opinions in the comments section below. And if you believe this trade war is over, think again, because Beijing just slammed the next door shut. Thank you for watching and enjoying this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out another one of our videos now on your screen.